Hi there. There's a lot of misunderstanding in Pirsig's work about how quality creates subjects and objects. And it's confusing for me as well. I'm constantly trying to figure out a way to make it clearer to myself and others. And I found a very valuable ally in this, and that's Jonathan Pageau, because he's got something it's in his brother's book and it's in the work he does, particularly the parable of the sower. So wisdom, or so there's the seed. The seed of wisdom is the seed of the original creation, if that makes sense. So when God creates the world, there's a point of light. And in that point of light, in that point, is the beginning of all reality. And this pattern, this wisdom contained in this tiny point, in this seed, is emulated over and over again with every act of creativity. Inside the seed, the kernel of wisdom is, if it drops on fertile ground, it's going to populate with the pattern, with the eternal pattern of existence, the thing that lines everything up, the thing that is the structure of consciousness and the structure of reality. Okay, so in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, there is a seed. There is a seed crystal, he calls it, and that's when Sarah Vinke asks Phaedrus if he's teaching quality. And that's how the whole thing began. Are you teaching quality? I hope you're teaching quality to your students. So this is how he describes the seed crystal. A supersaturated solution is one in which the saturation point at which no more material will dissolve has been exceeded. This can occur because the saturation point becomes higher as the temperature of the solution is increased. When you dissolve material at a high temperature and then cool the solution, the material sometimes doesn't crystallize because the molecules don't know how. They require something to get them started, a seed crystal or a grain of dust, or even a sudden scratch or tap on the surrounding glass. This is a really important concept that doesn't sound important to this whole philosophy. But what it is in the right circumstances, something can introduce into that situation and populate with a beautiful pattern, and everything lines up and becomes coherent. This is, I think, what Jonathan Pageau is talking about, that seed. It falls on fallow ground, or it falls on the path. And that's a number of ways that when you get the word from God, the good news from God, that can transform your life so it coheres with the pattern of reality, with the way consciousness and reality actually line up. You have to be ready for it. Otherwise, it's just you might find it amusing for a while, or beguiling for a while because it sounds good, and then you're just going to forget it. And that's where that's described by the bird coming and picking up the seed. You get the seed, you're all happy about it, and then the bird comes and takes it. And then there's the other one where the seed just falls on fallow ground. But the third one is where the soil is prepared and the seed is exactly what's needed for this meeting of quality, for the quality event to grow the plant. So that's how quality creates subjects and objects in the world. Remember the Poincaré, that you're thinking about the math problem, it's just not lining up, and then you get that one fact out of the multitude, the combinatorially explosive multitude of facts that allows these facts that are milling around that you know have quality, but you don't know how to unite everything in a pattern, in a mathematical pattern of cohesiveness and completion and beauty. This is how quality creates subjects and objects of the world, because when you have that quality stimulus, you then have that aha moment and you know how to manifest the stimulus. You know, this can be any situation you can ever be in. And let's just say an artistic situation. You know, you're outside and you're looking at a tree and you are wondering how to depict it, and you start to draw, and all of a sudden the quality of the tree allows you to create a quality analog of that tree. It can be abstract, it can be realistic, it doesn't matter. You've got that sense of quality, and how you translate that onto the paper creates the drawing, the quality drawing. It may not be a quality drawing, and that's a different case. That might be more like the fallow ground, or that might be more like the the bird coming and taking the seed. But if you can unite that quality experience of looking at the tree with your pencil and paper and create a drawing that you know has quality, and you're going to know it because that's how art is, that is an example of how quality creates subjects and objects. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Probably I'll eventually come up with a better analogy, but that's the one I have right now. Now, a lot of things that are happening now in the news have to do with cultural immune system, and I think I'll talk about that tomorrow, because there's something that's dying, something bad that's dying, and people don't want it to die, so they're desperately trying to keep it alive because of the cultural immune system. I think you know what I'm talking about. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So I'm going to read something from LILA. I can't remember which chapter. I think it's chapter 9. Why is a man apt to feel bad in a good environment, say suburban Short Hills, New Jersey, on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon? Why is the same man apt to feel good in a very bad environment, say in an old hotel in Key Largo in a hurricane? Why is it that a man riding a good commuter train from Larchmont to New York, whose needs and drives are satisfied, who has a good home, loving wife and family, good job, and enjoys unprecedented cultural and recreational facilities, often feels bad without knowing why? Why is it that if such a man suffers a heart attack and is taken off the train at New Rochelle, regains consciousness and finds himself in a strange place, he then comes to himself for the first time in years, perhaps in his life, and begins to gaze at his own hand with a sense of wonder and delight? This is Pirsig quoting someone, but what it illustrates is when you have a stagnant situation and dynamic quality comes in, even if the situation is in terms of the static pattern of stability, of middle class stability and respectability. This is something you don't want to happen, a heart attack. Yet suddenly, after this heart attack, dynamic quality comes in and you have a fresh view of reality. This is why sometimes when people have some kind of health crisis, they come out of it with a renewed and fresh look at their lives. This unforeseen thing, this novelty, it gives you a sense of wonder and mystery. It's just fresh and compelling. It's like listening to a great song for the first time on the radio that you absolutely love. Those are examples that Pirsig gives. Now imagine living like this all the time. It's probably impossible, but imagine trying to live as much as you can with a sense of wonder, because if you look around you, look at these, look at the wind and what it's doing, and the wind chime. I hope you can see. There's that pattern of reality in the wind and in nature, but it doesn't have to be in nature. You're going to see it in the gears of a motorcycle. You're going to see something that just lines up and makes sense, just like this wind in the leaves makes sense. You know that it's beautiful. It's beautiful. The same way that good motorcycle maintenance, or even say you're a program, a video game designer, and you design something that really encapsulates a world in a holistic fashion. Now I know, playing video games can be addictive and stuff, but they aren't bad in themselves. And if you create something that seems holistic and whole in your programming, it's the same kind of thing. It lines up with the pattern of reality, or the pattern of consciousness. One person we're going to explore on this channel is Christopher Alexander. I think I mentioned him before. He's an architect who has this understanding of that wholeness that we're talking about, the self, the pattern of creativity, which is always the same, but can be populated with a combinatorially explosive amount of material. And that is that holistic thing that we're trying to get back to. And you're going to see this even in some of these discussions, say on Rebel Wisdom and everything. A lot of these discussions are about getting out of a single narrow way of thinking and going back to a holistic way of thinking. And it's not in this kind of airy-fairy, new agey sense. It's a real restructuring of how we understand reality. We want to expand it now that we can. Now that we have pretty much conquered nature. You're going to say we haven't, but comparatively so we have. Pretty much we have everything in place to alleviate most of the biological problems there are. And you're going to say, oh, well, the pandemic and stuff. Well, just compare how many people this pandemic killed compared to the Spanish flu, for example, or any other number of pandemics. So now that we are at this point, it's time to integrate, let's just say what John Vervaeke says, the 4 ways of knowing. This is about expanding consciousness. Again, not in an airy-fairy way, but in a way that we actually can afford to do, because the subject-to-object material way of looking at the world has run its course, in the sense it's given us what we need, and now we have the chance to expand. You're gonna see this in Ken Wilber too. So you could introduce into your life something like an intention to see things freshly, to pay attention to when you're cutting yourself off, like the value trap in chapter 26 of Zam. When you think that or the ego trap, when you think how the way things should be. The biggest impediment to really living a full life, I think, is a preconceived notions, and I think the Buddhists would say the same thing. So imagine living your life, letting dynamic quality in, even in bad situations, even when you're having a fight with someone, even when things are not going your way. That sounds a little idealistic, but I don't think it is. I think that it is an attitude that can actually be cultivated. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next time.